Relationship. At UU Jazz, we like to say that all of our justice building is based on relationship. Relationships with congregations, relationships with individual activists, relationships with community organizations who share our values. When we go to UU Day at the legislature, we focus on building relationships with our elected officials. Rather than trying to impress them with facts and figures and the obvious correctness of our position, we share personal stories of how legislation and policies affect us, our families, our friends, those in our congregations or communities. That kind of talk is less likely to activate defensiveness and more likely to build relationships. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Yet we know that not all people are treated that way, though we usually are. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote equity and compassion in human relations. And I personally have been stopped by the police for turning into a lane that I wanted rather than the lane that I should have safely turned into. Yet I was let off with a warning. Had I been driving while brown, I could have been cited, asked for my papers, and maybe even incarcerated or deported. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. Yet we know that not everyone has equal access to the ballot box. We affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And while we're living a pretty good life here in the United States, we know that this is not true for everyone in our country, and certainly not for those living in many other countries. Now, to be clear, I love our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. I find them to be quite a thorough moral compass. Yet at sometimes they can seem like lofty aspirations, concepts, rather than something tangible. Because I know that just affirming them does not make them true in the world. It's really the promoting them, acting on them in our community that moves us in the direction of making them real. I think that the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt has it right when she says that if we cannot bring justice into the small circle of our own lives, we cannot hope to bring justice to the world. And if we do not bring justice to the world, then none of us is safe and none of us will survive. Nothing that Unitarian Universalists need do is more important than making justice real here in our community, where we are. Hard as diversity is, it is our most important task. We need to make relationships personal and real, to understand the perspectives and realities of those in our larger community that are affected by injustice. We need to engage with people who are not us. And we will be much more successful if we become aware of our own white worldview if we want to understand the worldviews of others. It turns out that I am a racist. Growing up, I learned that if I am walking alone, I should cross to the other side of the street to be safe if a black man is approaching. I also learned that in cities like Detroit or Cleveland or Philadelphia, if I'm in bad areas of town, read poor black neighborhoods, I should surreptitiously lean my arm on the edge of the car door and push down the lock button with my elbow. Now, at the same time, I was raised as a Unitarian Universalist, believing that all people have inherent worth and dignity, and internalizing a theology that I'm here on earth to help make the world a better place. So how do I reconcile both learned fear and love? Well, the first anti-racism trainings that I experienced felt shaming and guilt-inducing. I felt bad for being white, something that I can do nothing about. Then, in 2014, the UU Congregation of Phoenix hosted an anti-racism training open to Unitarian Universalists across the state. There we talked about racism as institutional racism, a system of how our society operates. And we talked about anti-racism as a set of skills that I can learn. This summer, I found an excellent book, newly published by our own Beacon Press, an imprint of the Unitarian Universalist Association. It's called White Fragility: Why It Is So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, by Robin DiAngelo. It's now on the New York Times bestseller list. So I just want to say, I know that there are those among us who identify as mixed race or as people of color. And I want to be clear that in this next section, I will be particularly talking to people among us who primarily identify as white, because alleviating white fragility is our work to do. So in her book, Robin DiAngelo, she based it on the construct of identity politics. She states, the United States was founded on the principle that all people are created equal. Yet the nation began with the attempted genocide of indigenous people and the theft of their land. American wealth was built on the labor of kidnapped and enslaved Africans and their descendants. Women were denied the right to vote until 1920, and black women were denied access to that right until 1964. The term identity politics refers to the focus on the barriers specific groups face in their struggle for equality. We have yet to achieve our founding principle, but any gains, she says, we have made thus far have come through identity politics. The identities of those sitting at the tables of power in this country have remained similar from the beginning: white, male, middle and upper class, able-bodied. The decisions made at those tables affect the lives of those not at the tables. Exclusion by those at the table doesn't depend on willful intent. We don't have to intend to exclude for the results to be exclusionary. Naming who has access to the decision-making power and who doesn't guides our efforts in challenging injustice. DiAngelo goes on to say, racism has been among the most complex social dilemmas since the founding of this country. While there is not biological race as we understand it, race as a social construct has profound significance and shapes every aspect of our lives. Race will influence whether we survive our birth, where we are most likely to live, which schools we will attend, who our friends and partners may well be, what careers we will have, how much money we will earn, how healthy we will be, and even how long we can expect to live. So, she starts with the premise that racism is real, it exists, and she goes on to explain the phenomenon of white fragility, how we develop it, how it protects racial inequality, and how and what we might do about it. She includes a history of racism and our dominant white culture in the United States, and then discusses some characteristics of the white cultural lens that blinds us to stumbling blocks to dismantling racism. In her years of experience as an anti-racist educator, D'Angelo has noticed some unexamined beliefs that support our racial responses. One is the belief that only bad people are racist. I hope that's not true. I think that what's behind our strong reaction to studying white supremacy is that concept. We think of white supremacists as skinheads with swastika tattoos who intentionally do mean things to people of color. We are most definitely not part of that group. So why would we need to talk about white supremacy? However, white supremacy also refers to the fact that our white culture dominates the way things work in our country. And that's the definition that I'm using. As white people, we are participants in a shared culture, and we are socialized into shared ways of thinking. Two challenging Western beliefs are individualism and objectivity. Individualism holds that we are each unique and stand apart from others, even those within our own social groups. Objectivity tells us that it is possible to be free of all bias. Individualism reinforces the idea that each of us is a unique individual and that our group identities, such as race, class, or gender, have nothing to do with our opportunities. Instead, it is our individual character and hard work that make the difference. We often talk about the self-made man or woman, or how we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and made it on our own. It is easy to forget about the benefits of the families, communities, and networks that support us on our way. We gain our understanding of our white culture through shared, unavoidable aspects of society, like television, movies, the news, song lyrics, magazines, textbooks, school, religion, literature, stories, jokes, tradition, history, and more. I wonder where I learned to cross the street when black men approach and to lock my car door with my elbow. It happened so long ago, I can't remember. Yet, if I understand racism as a system into which I was socialized, I have a choice. Rather than getting angry or defensive, I can receive feedback on my racially problematic behavior as a helpful way to support my growing awareness, and now, hopefully, I won't do it again. And if I do, I will try again. D'Angelo writes, "This book is intended for us, for white progressives who so often, despite our conscious intentions, make life so difficult for people of color." She says, "I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not a racist, or is less racist, or is in the choir, or already gets it." White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think that we have arrived, we will put our energy into having others see us as having arrived. None of our energy then will go into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. So my vote is that we make white fragility the next UUA common read. so that among ourselves we can discuss and begin to understand our own challenges to building the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Now, of course, if you decided to have an adult faith development opportunity or a book group to read and discuss the book now, that would be okay too. No sense waiting to engage in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice, right? May we make it so through our living. And I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number, let me see, I just had it, 318, which is in your gray hymnal. We Would Be One.